Good morning, everybody. Happy Tuesday. We have an amazing show for everybody today. Extra amazing, Ryan, because it's a bro show. Extra amazing.
Crystal will be here tomorrow.
That's right. Crystal will be here tomorrow with Emily. So we've got the most ambitious crossovers of all time. The Breaking Point cinematic universe truly expanding here and making some big moves.
The writer's room is really getting creative.
That's right, the writer's room. No writers, because we are supportive of the writers' strike.
That's true. We would not have
We are supportive of the writers'
writers.
strike. We would never have scab writers. That's not what we do. So we've got a great show for everybody today. We've got Ukraine. We're going to talk a little bit about what's going on in Belgorod, Russia. Some crazy stuff, cross-border activity, accusations flying across the border, and then some new revelations as to why exactly the Biden administration reversed itself on the F-16 policy. We're going to talk about the debt ceiling. Ryan, you're going to give us your extensive Capitol Hill experience and break all this stuff down. You got a great historical knowledge of the last time this all went down. I think it will be very useful for a lot of the listeners, just because it is a crazy situation. We're getting closer and closer, possibly to doomsday scenario. We're going to talk about some new polling about migrants, about how Americans are feeling about the border crisis. And then Ryan actually flagged some interesting stuff going on in Florida. Well, maybe going on.
Might be going on. TikTok says it's going on.
TikTok says it is going on. They say there's a labor strike in Florida after E-Verify was put into place. So we'll take a little bit of a look at that. We're going to talk about 2024. Tim Scott, we're always, of course, covering 2024 here. Tim Scott officially announcing, give you some thoughts. Glenn Youngkin also thinking about throwing his hat there in the ring. We'll see how that works. And then, I love this story. Uber's head of diversity has been put on leave for saying that people should not discriminate against white women. And
then they called her
Karen.
manager.
And then they called her manager. They actually were the Karens. That's the most hilarious. This is a great story. We're going to break it down. And just a follow-on to everything about how D&I is a complete scam. But before we get to that, I just want to say thank you all to the premium subscribers who continue to sign up, support our work, our ability to have candidates. We've got RFK coming back, Marianne, several others. They'll be joining us at the studio with the brand new desk, the new set. Ryan, I know you don't like the bricks.
Yes.
So they'll be gone soon. You got to be a little bit sad about it.
A little bit, but what we could do is we can have open mic nights
That's
here.
Right. Yeah, that's right.
that's the vibe.
Right, like maybe dim the lights,
yes.
And all of that. Yeah, maybe we should. We can add a little bit of income and help pay for the set.
Genius.
Actually, I think
we can
it's
reduce
easier.
the premium prices if we make money off the open
Well, let's
mic
not
night.
get carried away.
Yeah, okay.
No, listen, maybe it's easier if just the people who support our show continue to do so. BreakingPoints.com. It's a lot easier so that we don't have to get into the open mic business. Although I wouldn't be above it. It'd be kind of fun, to be honest. So anyway, we appreciate you all so much. We're getting really excited. Everything's being fabricated. It will soon debut. New graphics, new everything, and premium members get the official first look at the entire set. We're going to have a very special event for all of you. Check your inboxes to make sure that you keep updated. But let's go ahead and get to the show. As I alluded to with Ukraine, extraordinary action happening yesterday. Let's throw this up from the Wall Street Journal. Ukrainian-backed troops have staged a cross-border incursion into Russia. The Ukrainian military intelligence identified the fighters as two volunteer groups of Russian citizens, kind of like those little green men that walked into Crimea, right, Ryan? So what they said is that President Putin was the first to make the accusation after open source intelligence suggested that there was some major cross-border activity happening in the Belgorod region of Russia. For those who aren't familiar, it is a town that's about a half-hour's drive of the official Ukrainian border, and it's kind of been a hotbed of activity since the start of the invasion, but actually really going back all the way to 2014. Belgorod itself has not been unspared in this conflict. Apparently, the Russians accidentally dropped a bomb in the middle of the city.
That's right.
Not that long ago. So goes to show you that great Russian military and how good it can be sometimes, bombing accidentally their own citizens. But the reason why this is so significant is that there is basically no denying that these two groups, who they call themselves, Ryan, were like Free Russian Fighters.
The Russia Volunteer Corps and
so the Russian
Free
Volunteer
Russia Legion.
Corps, right, the Free Russia Legion, but that is part of the overall foreign legions that are overseen directly by the Ukrainian Military Intelligence Directorate, otherwise known as HUR. For those who don't know, HUR has been the one behind all of the quote-unquote covert Ukrainian attacks on Russian soil. And it's why many of the assurances by Zelensky and others that, oh, we've never attacked Russia, it's ridiculous, ridiculous on its face. So what do you make of the attack, Ryan? Approximately 8 people or so were injured. Doesn't appear to see too many killed. But the reason why it's important is that this is the first known incursion, or at the very least, this is the first and most brazen incursion yet by Ukrainian-backed forces, and really de facto U.S.-backed forces, onto Russian soil since the beginning of the conflict.
Right, and they're not really trying to hide it because they're doing this funny rationale where they're saying, yes, it's true that these fighters are affiliated with us, but when they go into Russia,
we have no idea.
They're no longer affiliated with us, and then they're acting independently. But they also made clear through the entire operation that they had excellent communication lines open with these. So they're basically saying without saying, because if you say that we have now invaded Russian soil with these troops, then diplomatically and militarily, that is an escalation, even though it's just words, which is what's so absurd.
Are we really going to say that this didn't have anything to do with the F-16s? Like the one thing that they wanted, which of course, President Biden said yesterday, oh, we would never, he gave me an assurance, we won't use it to attack Russia. Like the day after, you see the most brazen. And here's the other thing. Like I said, they're not even bashful about it. A spokesperson for the Ukrainian Intelligence Directorate said that the aim of the operation was to create a buffer zone to protect Ukrainian civilians. We expect that such actions will become more frequent. And I think this is the time to put in the same caveat that I always have for the NAFO folks. Everyone's like, how can you blame Ukraine for? I can't blame them.
It's not about judgment.
There's no judgment happening here at all. This is about strategic calculus and blowback for the United States. If I was them, I'd be doing the same thing. And guess what, though? If you experience the risk of, like some catastrophic retaliation, well, that risk should be 100% borne by you. And instead, we're the ones who are supplying this army. We're the ones who are basically running all of their ops out of the Pentagon. And that was probably the most significant thing that came out of those leaked docs. Like, we're literally running battle damage assessments for the Ukrainian military the way that we did in the past for, like, our airstrikes on ISIS. Except, we were actually trying to kill. We were the ones engaged in the fight against ISIS. We don't really have anything to do with this. Yet the same level of military operational, capacity is being used to support them. So overall, once again, the reason why this is important, put this up there on the screen, the Ukrainian government continues to deny any accusations of attacking the Belgorod region. They say that it's anti-Putin militias, as I've said before, but they are slowly and really, almost completely at this point, eroding any credibility that they have. And again, people are like, oh, what are you saying? You believe the Russians? No, I believe videos coming out of Belgorod of people getting shot. So I'm like, well, I wonder who's doing this. I'm not saying the Russians are trustworthy, but the real jump the shark moment for the Zelensky government, Ryan, was when they immediately blamed the Russians for that, for those 2 deaths in Poland after their anti-aircraft missile anti-aircraft missile killed 2 Polish civilians. And they were like, this is Russia. This is why we need a no-fly zone. And then immediately after it comes out, it's like, no, that was actually Ukrainian anti-aircraft. And here's the other thing. They never even apologized. They still deny that it was ever them. And we're all supposed to just brush past the fact that we're like, oh, like we literally cannot trust you at all. Like, you're a liar. And you are a liar specifically because you want to draw us further into your conflict. So how do we know? Here's the other question, too. How much command and control does Zelensky have over this? Because every time I read in the New York Times about how some strange men who happened to blow up the Nord Stream pipeline, who may or may not have been connected to Ukraine, they're like, but Zelensky had no idea. So either that's false or it's true. Both are actually very troubling. Both are a big problem.
Sure. And Zelensky, fairly new leader.
Yes.
Overseeing a disorganized, young kind of military and country. So you could imagine that you would have, in a country that previously had so many different power centers, or organized around regional powers and oligarchic powers. You could imagine that is not the kind of thing that's easily going to be condensed into the power of just one presidency.
Could you kind of explain that? Because I think that there is often a bias of people who grew up only in the West who are used to democratic countries. In developing countries, and specifically post-Soviet republics, power is very often not concentrated in the hands of just an executive. It's disparate. Right. It technically says one thing on paper and actually works very differently in practice. And that's actually very typical for a post-Soviet state like Ukraine, and would explain why Zelensky really doesn't run the show.
Yeah, the West came into all of those, to Russia and the ones countries outside of it, with what they called shock therapy, which is they took all of the kind of Soviet Union assets, public assets, say whether it's the gas companies, which then hired Hunter Biden later, all the rest of the economy, and they held auctions. And only particular flunkies, if you were close enough to the right people, were able to be in on those auctions. And so they were able to buy, say, Gazprom, for pennies on the dollar.
Right.
And then overnight, they own Manchester United or whatever. That's where you get Russian oligarchs. That's where you get Ukrainian oligarchs. They always own some type of gas company or something like that. And so from that comes power, because then we tried to just layer on top of this elections rather than kind of building the institutions and the culture of democracy from bottom up. We just said, okay, we don't have a communist party anymore. We don't have public ownership of all of these assets. We have private ownership of them, and on this date, you're going to have an election. Right. And so the oligarchs are like, okay, cool, here are my candidates.
The other reason I think, Ryan, that this is all important is it's about command and control. It's about like I said, Zelensky had knowledge and ordered the attack, which I think is likely. I think he probably did, given the intelligence assessments that we have privately.
Belgorod.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know why? It doesn't take a genius. They just suffered a massive battlefield loss in Bakhmut. And I actually want to spend some time on this as well, because I think it's very important for people to understand. Let's go into the next part here, and I'll explain why I think it's important to put the whatever happened in Bakhmut, and then also tie it to the way that the U.S. is continuing to increase its aid. So the Wall Street Journal says, to aid Ukraine in a fight against Russia, allies are looking to a security model like Israel. Now, here's the problem, Ryan. I don't think a lot of people understand this. Before Ukraine, there was one country in the world that got more money from the United States than any other. Do you know what it was called? Israel. And it was also a high-tech developed democracy. It was always a little bit curious why exactly they needed that money. So they say NATO membership is not on the table for now. Oh, for now? Why not forever? And then U.S. and European allies could create Kyiv guarantees for weapons and advanced technology. Now, the reason why I think that the F-16s are now flowing to Ukraine, that they are, engaging in these cross-border Belgorod attacks, and why they recently attacked Putin and all that is, look, on the one hand, things are going well for them. They killed a lot of Russians in Bakhmut. They obviously had massive success in their spring counteroffensive. On the other hand, the Russians also killed a lot of them in Bakhmut. And guess what? The Russians are the ones with a population that can easily backfill all of those dead people. They have an industrial base. They have an intact economy. Their homeland is not ultimately, basically decimated or scorched earth. Whereas Ukraine has lost 20% or so of its entire territory. It doesn't have an industrial base, massive refugee crisis. They're drafting 55-year-olds. I mean, things are not going well over there. I think even Zelensky would admit that, which is why he's constantly begging for ammo and for weapons. Well, one of the things that we're trying to do is basically pump as much into Ukraine as possible to make sure that they can maybe make some more gains in the spring offensive. From what I've read so far, spring offensive looks like it's still probably coming. The issue for them right now is that the ground remains still muddy. I was reading an excellent analysis yesterday about how muddy ground actually can persist all the way up until June, and that heavy rain is still forecast in the reaches. We still could be waiting for a week, maybe 2 weeks, 3 weeks, something like that. They're really waiting for the conditions on the ground to get better. After that period, that's kind of the off switch for U.S. aid to Ukraine, maybe. So they're trying to pump as much into Ukraine as possible to kind of freeze the conflict where it is right now with Israel. But here's, one of the dangers that I think that comes from that. you know, it's not like we didn't suffer the consequences for 60 odd years of our policy towards Israel in the Middle East that has caused not only about consternation there, it caused real issues for us. I mean, go back and read some of the original justification for why Osama bin Laden and all of them wanted to attack the United States or Chechens, you know? There's, the point I'm making is, it wasn't a costless decision, not only in terms of money, but also geopolitically. So are we signing up for basically a guarantee of Ukraine's security forever? And if that's true, then you're basically, you know, giving them de facto NATO membership almost at that point.
Because Israel has sort of de facto NATO membership in a way.
Yeah, I mean, we basically
you have so many different interlocking security guarantees. And then you wonder who are the Palestinians in the Ukrainian question? Is it Russian-speaking Ukrainians?
Right.
Who are then, because before the invasion, the Russian speakers in Ukraine were treated in a way that here in the United States we would find appalling. To say, like, if we ever see anybody saying like no Spanish, you can't speak Spanish here, we're like, get out of here. Like this is a melting pot. If they want to speak Spanish, they can speak Spanish. So attempts to ban the Russian language and things like that. So is that what they mean by? Or does that flow from that model? If you actually put up this last element here.
Yeah, let's go to the next one, guys, please. Yeah.
This is like the vision that some war policymakers here in the United States have for how this war could end, and it's not crazy. Like
this is actually
probably the most likely ending. They call it a freeze. So if you think about, well, actually, Israel-Palestine, a decent one.
Or South Korea, that's really what they point to.
South Korea, where they basically have never signed a peace treaty, but Israel-Palestine too. There are just sort of lines that people recognize, not as legal lines that demarcate different countries, but lines over which we're not going to shoot at each other.
Yeah,
And so then Russia keeps territory, but doesn't, quote unquote, keep territory.
Yes, but there's a lot of perils to that. I mean, first of all, North Korea, it didn't work out so well for us. We were like, we'll contain it, hermit kingdom, it'll collapse on itself. Well, turns out they actually not only survived, they also created nuclear weapons. And now they can bomb and destroy Los Angeles if they want to. And we have this basically madman, not even men, they're pretty rational, but they're also crazy. And they have nukes. Yeah. And it's 45 minutes away from Seoul, which is one of the most dynamic and incredible cities literally on planet Earth, with massive amounts of GDP and companies, making awesome cell phones, like maybe somebody one just got. And those are all in danger. And also, people forget this. We have spent hundreds of billions of dollars. We have bases all over South Korea. We have thousands of U.S. troops who are stationed on the peninsula at all times, specifically in case there's ever a jump off between North and South Korea. So once again, it's not costless what has happened.
But I think we've spent more in South Korea than anywhere else in the world.
It might be right.
After World War II. And when you're at a state of perpetual war, because you've never declared peace, it also erodes whatever democratic institutions you have inside there. South Korea, for that reason, was a series of military dictatorships and coups.
What, until the 1970s?
Yeah, absolutely brutal, horrific place to live for anybody who was remotely critical of the government, because they would use, well, look, these North Koreans are right across the border, they're going to come marching into Seoul, so therefore we need to crush dissent. You could see Ukraine developing that type of authoritarian culture if they're constantly under threat, because it makes sense. Like, Abraham Lincoln was not the greatest Democrat at the height of Civil War.
Well, let me flip it too, where I would actually say it was probably worth it in South Korea. And you know why? It's like I just said, because they got cool companies like Samsung, and
nice
a lot of us drive Korean cars. They have incredible technology. They are great allies because they spend a ton of their money on defense. They're not moochers in any way. They draft their own men, have mandatory military service. Like, that's
what Ukraine will do too. Ukraine will be one more place where we can dump all of our excess military capacity.
Well, there's certainly that, but what I would posit is, I don't see the next Samsung, no offense, coming out of Ukraine. Like, I'm sorry, in terms of...
I don't know, well, maybe they'll all get wiped out, but for 10, 15 years, I mean, wiped out by AI or whatever, but for 10 or 15 years, Ukrainian engineers and software developers were the thing that were was powering.
So you're
big
right,
tech.
but a lot of them left. They don't live in Ukraine anymore. Yeah. Actually, so those, from what I've read, are the very first people who actually left.
Right. They had connections
they all
already
came here, or they went to the West. They already had dual citizenship or any of that. So look, this again, it's not a slight. I'm just saying, out of one of the most corrupt countries on earth, like I'm doubtful that we're going to see. And also, frankly, you know, at this point, like this is a down market region of Europe, which is already down market GDP relative to all of Asia. Sorry, Europeans.
I mean, South Korea is massively corrupt too. So South Korea was massively corrupt too, and just milking the U.S.
I think this is a good point. So I guess people can turn it around, but I would just point at general trends and directions and just be like, well, which way am I betting my money on? I'm betting on Asia, and I'm looking at what some of the things that are happening here, and the Israeli and the South Korean model. I think the two things that you and I can agree on were they cost us a hell of a lot of money in the long run, and not only that, we signed up for security situations which have definitely imperiled us. I mean, you know, and again, that can be worth it. I think it absolutely is worth it in terms of South Korea. But we should acknowledge that, you know, one of our major cities, Los Angeles or Hawaii, for example, one of our states, is literally at risk of annihilation because of our relationship with that country. I think that's a balance and a trade that is probably worth it in the long run, given the amount of economic activity and cross-cultural connection and all that we have. But that needs to be a conscious choice by the American people. And I don't think that is a conscious choice right now for Ukraine. And if they want it to be that way, well, you got to sell it to us then. You got to come out and say, like, all right, guys, we're signing up for a 100-year commitment here, and that we're gonna turn Ukraine into the next South Korea. It's like, okay, well, are we all ready for, you know, $1 trillion or so to be spent in terms of economic development there? That seems like a big lift, and not something necessarily that has a democratic support. Right. So they have to sell it to us first.
Right. None of these wars were like declared and voted on.
Right. Bingo. And that's the most important. Let's go to the debt ceiling.
All right, so Kevin McCarthy and Joe Biden met in the White House yesterday. Here's Kevin McCarthy, House Speaker, after that meeting.
The president, he said that he's willing to cut spending, but he also wants to raise revenue as well. Are you willing to talk about that?
No, just to be clear why. When you talk about raising revenue, if you look at the 50-year average of America, how much money have we brought in by revenue? That would be roughly about 17% of GDP. Right now, we're bringing almost 20% of GDP in revenue. Now, how many times has that happened in modern history? Only twice, in 1944 and in 2000. So you're bringing in more money at a higher percentage than any other time.
Can you explain, first of all, that was his reaction right outside of the White House, but we have a thread, Ryan. Could you break this down, I think, for the audience? Let's put it up there on the screen. These are just about what exactly the GOP wants, and can you put it in plain English for everybody?
So basically what Republicans are saying is that spending increased significantly under the Biden administration, so therefore it's unfair to say that we're going to do the normal cost of living inflation adjustments because we did such significant bumps over the last couple of years, so therefore we need to spend less. And that's the thing that might get Republicans hung up completely, is that, and you can move to the next one so people can, if they want to read this while we're talking. Republicans are saying we want to spend absolutely less, like not just as a percentage, not just a slower rate of growth, but less than the year before.
Nominal. Right.
And they want to spend more on the Pentagon. So if you want to give more to the military and you want to give less overall, then you have to give a huge amount less. And if you have already agreed accidentally in a State of Union not to touch Medicare and Social Security, that limits you to discretionary spending, which is
less
like,
than what?
That's like the
10% of the
budget.
budget.
Like the EPA, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, it's veterans. A lot of that is veterans, which is what is also getting Republicans hung up, because they're like, oh, no, of course we're not going after veterans. Like, okay, so you keep saying there's all these things you're not going after, and that leaves them with, SNAP.
Yep.
And then they want to go after some of the climate tax credits in IRA, and for Biden, that's a red line. And he wouldn't have the votes for that in the House or Senate anyway. And so then they're stuck. Now they're back to well, okay, what can we do about food stamps again? And then they're going to say, and we're only going to do work requirements for able-bodied people without dependents.
Okay.
The number of people getting food stamps in that situation is very slim.
Really?
And the amount they get is like $19 or something. Okay. $20 a month. Like,
so this is where he's talking about. If we can go to they're talking about both are agreeing on permitting reform. This is one where I'm pretty pro permitting reform, Ryan. But can you steel man? Yes. Okay, I was gonna say, can you at least steel man where I am on this? Because I don't think people understand this. It has to do with it. Okay, it's framed by its detractors as just about oil. But it's not just about oil. It has to do with all clean energy. And so as somebody who is very anti the current regulatory regime around wind, solar, and nuclear, especially nuclear, permitting reform to me actually does look like an incredibly good idea. But maybe explain it to why people are opposed.
So, I'm a kind of a heretic on this.
Right.
But to make the argument against permitting reform, what people say is like, look, they're already telling us we have 5 or 10 years to cap emissions at what are already catastrophic levels that are putting humanity at risk, like of an existential crisis. Like that's the argument. And there's a lot of climate science that says, actually, that could be right. And that if you do permitting reform that is geared toward the fossil fuel industry, and the fact that API, the American Petroleum Institute, left its watermark on Joe Manchin's permitting reform, really poisoned the well,
explain that for people.
So to speak. So oftentimes legislation is written on K Street by lobbyists, and Newt Gingrich helped bring this about in 1994 when he took over. He gutted the amount of staff that the public had, so the public gets what it pays for, and so members of Congress outsource a lot of their legislative writing to K Street. So the American Petroleum Institute wrote Joe Manchin's permitting reform legislation. Put their watermark on it and forgot to take it off when they circulated.
So what is your pro case for permitting reform?
So the pro case is that we have learned from recent inflation politics and also from the Yellow Vest protests in France that turning around climate politics by forcing working class people to pay more for energy is just maybe in an ideal world where you're an authoritarian and you can just crush all dissent, you can do it, but it's not going to work. It's going to produce popular revolt and your policies are going to be repealed. So what's the point of trying to force through a policy that's just going to get repealed amid anger? The only way you're going to get there is if renewables and clean energy can compete
and are cheap
and are cheaper than fossil fuels.
Right.
And so you're not going to be able to keep everything in the ground by force. The way you're going to keep things in the ground is the way you're keeping coal in the ground now in the United States, which is companies look at it and they're like, it's not worth the money it takes to dig that out of the ground.
Yeah, it's cheaper to burn natural gas. And
so we'll
no one is saying natural gas is great, but it's a hell of a lot better than coal.
And so the argument for permitting reform is you can't get enough wind, solar, geothermal, and other renewables online at scale in order to drive the price down. If every single neighborhood can look at a transmission line and say, you know what, we'd prefer actually not to have a transmission line. Oh, really? That's interesting. That's surprising. We've never met anybody who would, rather not have, construction in their backyard.
Yes.
It's like, guess what? That's our choice.
Yeah.
No, and if we want to have 9 billion people on the planet who are using this much energy, we're going to have to get the energy from somewhere.
This is important for people to get because this is like one of the biggest wars in Washington right now. And that's another reason why I was pretty annoyed with Biden whenever he phrased it as like some massive giveaway to the oil industry. Sometimes the two things can be true. Industry can want something, it can also still be good, whenever it comes to cost. And like what you're laying out here, the way our regulatory regime, I've talked about this before in terms of like nuclear reactors. Like we haven't had a new nuclear reactor built in the United States, or at least has come online in the United States since the 1970s. Yeah. There's one currently in the works.
Allegedly,
it took way too long to build, and it cost way too much money. Now, some of that is definitely on the companies itself. A lot of it, though, is also on the government. And there's some crazy breakthrough technology happening right now in the world of nuclear reactors. They're looking at them that are so small they can fit literally inside of a truck. I mean, nuclear fission technology, and most of it is happening, the research, not in the US. And it's specifically because they don't think they can do business here. Unfortunately, the Europeans, while they sometimes have a better permitting regime, they also are anti-nuclear ideologically. And so we're really not seeing the uptake on this in the world's most developed economies. The Asians are the ones instead who are like, hey, come over here, except Japan. Now Japan is out also.
Because they had a little bit of a situation.
Right. Well, it was their fault, okay, and I'll maintain that. But that was 100% on them. The problem, though, also, Ryan, is that the way that this all fits is, as I understand it, this is a major Republican priority, but they are also not willing to trade on some revenue raisers. And this is where, let me call out the Republicans here, because this stuff drives me absolutely crazy. They specifically shot down closing the carried interest loophole, which is literally only beneficial for people who work in private equity and venture capital who are multi-millionaires, just so they don't have to pay a tax, which is equivalent to income tax like you or I or anybody else would, and can pay dramatically lower on their millions of profits. So, like, let's be clear. That's number one. Number two, where they're talking about here is wonky, but it's about pharmacy benefit managers. Can you explain that one to people?
And these are the new folks who are really in the crosshairs of everybody in Washington. Because, like,
scum of the earth.
Insurance companies and drug makers, who are some of the two of the most powerful lobbies in Washington, were like, who can we take out?
Right.
It's like, it's the pharmacy benefit managers. And these are the folks who are basically middlemen and are negotiating.
All they do is add costs.
Right.
Like, that is literally all they do, is add cost to prescription drug.
And it's yes, sure. You know, nuke the pharmacy benefit manager. It's not going to save everything, but it'll do something.
Right.
And it's hilarious because the public is clamoring for something, and the insurance industry and the pharmaceutical industry are like, here's something you can do. Yeah. And finally, Congress is like, yes, sir.
Yes, and there was a really funny part, Ryan, here, that we were talking about yesterday. Let's put it up there on the screen, about how there is a growing sense of regret within Democratic ranks that the party missed an opportunity to neutralize the debt limit when they fully controlled Congress and White House for 2 years. Oh, yeah. You think?
Whoops.
What a stupid idea. You know, my favorite part, Ryan, is that the best it's been explained to me, the reason why they didn't do it is because they would have had to put a number on it. And by putting a number on it, they thought that would be a bad headline. So they were not willing to sacrifice one bad headline for having to now cut all the programs that they passed while they were in office. And look, the ball is in the Republicans' court. There's no question. I mean, they are completely controlling the playbook here. You know, Biden and all of them have bent the knee almost in every way. Speaker McCarthy also spoke at the Capitol yesterday after he returned from the White House. Let's take a listen to what he said.
So what we would like to do is sit down. We have to spend less than we spent last year. And you got to know why. The Democrats spent $6 trillion. That brought us inflation, more dependent on China. We've had 3 of the biggest 4 banks failures just in the last couple months. So what we want to do is limit the amount of spending that we could do in the future, about 1%. That is an idea by Joe Manchin. Get our supply chain working again, so work requirements for only able-bodied people with no dependents.
Okay, so what do you get from that, Ryan, is that he's drawing it out, like he said, able-bodied people. But the problem is, I just don't see how you reach the overall top-line numbers here. So I think that the TLDR is we're trying to explain to everybody here, like, what exactly they want, what the White House doesn't want, and the consequences, I mean, we've talked about ad nauseum at this point, but are very grave. From what I have seen, one current estimate says 1.5 million people could lose their job within just the first 48 hours, that we would have Medicare and Social Security payments that would stop on June 8th if they let the crisis drag on, not to mention a very likely market drop of some 20% or so on the S&P 500. But here's the other thing. Nobody knows. Absolutely nobody knows how it would go. Even the 14th Amendment now and all of the consideration on that stuff, it's up in the air because Biden decided that he wouldn't do it, and now it's maybe on the table. So overall, it's a very chaotic situation, and it's not good. Where do you think things will progress from now?
I think it depends on what Republicans are willing to say yes to, because I think that Democrats, if Biden agrees to something, there will be enough Democrats that you get 100, you maybe get 100 Democrats in the House to go with it. So what's your sense on how many Republicans there are who would take a deal that is good for them? Let's say you're freezing spending and you've got 2 years worth of caps, and then you can fight it out in the next election against what the status quo was. It's a huge win, but it's not everything they wanted. Do you think that there will be a revolt? That seems to be the big question.
I don't know. There's no question. The other idea that I heard floated to me by somebody was, hey man, I don't think we'll devolve. They'll probably just do some 1-month extension or something like that to September, which, I mean, it's possible. I'm not so sure though that the far right people, like the Freedom Caucus type people in the House would go for that. So I genuinely don't know. I don't know what they would be willing to agree to.
They could get an extension, like Democrats would vote for an extension.
Dems would definitely vote for an extension, and it's possible they could say, look, the other thing is, and I kind of said this to Crystal yesterday, is I really think that nobody's going to budge until the markets crash. I think something's going to really crash. That was, by the way, I kept wondering, why do they keep holding these meetings at 4:30 p.m. or 5:30 p.m.? Somebody looked at me like it was an idiot, and I was like, duh, Saagar, they don't want the markets to crash. And I was like, oh, that's so obvious. That actually makes complete sense. So the reason why, everyone, if you're wondering why these are taking place later in the day, is because they have to wait until markets close so that there's no reaction to what they do.
For Biden, he's like, 4 o'clock, man, I'm done.
Yeah, I know. The guy never works past 4:30. That's why I was shocked. I said, since when does Biden have a 5:30 p.m. meeting on his calendar? But yeah, this apparently is the answer. Let's go to the next one here. These are some interesting polling, Ryan, around the border crisis and probably one of the more vulnerable areas for Democrats right now. Let's put it up there on the screen. CBS poll asked directly, do you think the Biden administration should be tougher or easier on migrants who are trying to cross at the U.S.-Mexico border? 58%, actually +4 from April, say tougher. Easier, only 20%. You know, what's fascinating is that even amongst Democrats, you've got 41% saying tougher, 20% easier. GOP is 84-11. Indy is 54-25. And then you've got the racial breakdown, ironically, Hispanic as well, which is often held up as some monolith, community, is also at 41% tougher, just so everybody knows. I think it's an interesting breakdown, Ryan, in terms of the broader and how much people are thinking about it. Put the next one up there on the screen, because people's feelings on this are more nuanced than you would think. So, for example, if you ask people, would you favor housing migrants or think there are facilities to do so? They're at 52-37. If you say housing migrants, willingness versus space concern, most people are very much in favor of housing them. However, in terms of some of the bigger breakdown, like, do you think that you should be tougher? Well, then, yeah, the vast majority actually say yes. For example, Ron Desantis got a lot of heat for sending migrants to Martha's Vineyard. They say, do you approve of migrants to sending northern states? They say, yes, you think we should involve parts of the country. Those places have more space and resources. People don't like it whenever it sends a political statement, but on its face, they're very much okay kind of with spreading migrants to places which don't have to bear the brunt. For example, I know there was a big thing with Martha's Vineyard, and they were like, yeah, you're dealing in, with what we deal with literally in like 30 minutes in El Paso or in Eagle Pass or any of these other places. They say, in general, what you find is a more nuanced view of the migrant immigration situation than I think is genuinely presented by the media. So what do you make of it?
I mean, one of the big concerns that the left has been forecasting over the last decade is what they call eco-fascism. That there's going to be so much popular resentment toward migrants driven by climate collapse around the world, war and climate collapse, that you're going to have countries in the developed world, the haves are going to keep out the have-nots. And that you're not going to just see demagogues pushing for walls in the United States. You're going to see that all over the Western and developed world outside of the Western world. And so I think that this is a step in that direction. I think you're going to see this. I think this is going to be where popular opinion is. At the same time, we're facing labor shortages and we're facing birthright issues that are going to make it so that ironically, the countries that are able to bring in the most young people who are able to work are going to be the ones that are going to grow in the 21st century.
So yeah, this is where I'm not so sure. This is a quasi-libertarian argument that I hear sometimes. And it's like, well, what's wrong with higher wages? I think higher wages are great. I mean, there's no labor shortage has frankly been one of the best things that's ever happened for the American working class. There's a lot of dispute on this, but there is some evidence is what I'm saying. And again, it is in dispute, I should be honest, that part of the Trump administration's at least reduction in overall migration had an impact on the overall wage had an impact on overall wage increase from 2017 till 2020. Obviously, 2020 things got a little bit wonky. Post that, I don't think you can say that the current wage conditions really had anything to do with immigration or not, just because of the madness of what happened with COVID and everything. But from before that period, yeah, I think there's good evidence. On the birth rate question, that one is where, and look, I think all of this presumes that this is almost puts like immigration on the same footing as legal versus illegal. And I think that is where some people like me, have the most objection. It's like, look, I think it's not necessarily the best position, but I think it's a defensible one to say, oh, well, we need more immigrants in order to take jobs, et cetera. It's like, okay, well, then you need to come here in an orderly process. Like you can't be, for example, we had 30,000 slots for asylum that people are allowed to apply for. We had 1.5 million people apply for that. Like, that's insane, and then here's the other thing. It's not fair to them either. These are people don't even speak any English, paying some coyote to drag them across Mexico, many of them being raped and killed in the process. Then they get here because they think they can just like waltz across and go to work. And it's like, oh, it turns out you're living in a shanty town in Mexico for the next 2 years. So, that's not a good situation for them, for a child, for a single mom, or, single adult male either. None of these things are good, I think, right now for anyone.
Right. We say you got to go through an orderly process, but our system is incapable
That's insane.
of or uninterested in producing an orderly process for them to go through. And so you're seeing states start to respond to it. Governor Ron DeSantis earlier in May signed into law a new immigration bill, which by July is going to require all companies to use E-Verify, which is basically requires you to run your employees through the federal system. If you don't, the fines are extraordinarily large, like I think $10,000 a pop or something like that. It also requires hospitals to take kind of the immigration information from patients who come in, and other ways to tighten the screws around the immigrant population. Here's how some of the local reporting has been unfolding, even before it has gone into actual official effect.
But a new immigration crackdown by the Florida legislature and Governor Ron DeSantis is now making it harder for them to live and work in the state.
And even though the policy is not yet in effect, CBS News Miami's Gabriela Arzola shows us how it has already shaken the undocumented community along with employers they work for.
A recent survey from the Migrant Policy Institute says there are around 800,000 undocumented immigrants right here in the state of Florida, many taking jobs like construction and agriculture, but that may not be for long. Around South Florida, labor workers are becoming more and more scarce by the day, according to some employees.
People aren't showing up to work because they're scared of being deported.
And critics say Senate Bill 1718 is to blame.
None on the desk, Mr. Speaker.
According to the bill, businesses could face up to a $10,000 fine per undocumented employee, and the state could revoke their license. For construction workers like Jose, he says half of the workers are already gone.
Many workers are leaving thinking they're going to be deported, so they're going to other states.
And if you notice, that was TikTok. This is
a big thing on TikTok.
It's a local news report that went on a TikTok, and these types of reports have been going viral. And it's creating an impression that might not quite yet be justified by the numbers. But I wanted to play one more, just so people have a sense of what's going around TikTok. Here's one more that's really been making the rounds, if we can roll this side.
Hello, everyone. This is an update. Today is Tuesday, May the 16th. It's not Sunday. There is my truck with grass, and this is a construction site here in Davenport, Florida, 20 miles from Orlando. And this is all you see. It's 9 a.m. Usually at this time there's a lot of people here working, all kind of contractors doing their job, roofers, of course, a lot of noise and loud Mexican music. This is what you hear today. So it is happening. It is not fake. It is not a joke. You see one contractor there. This is all thanks to Ron DeSantis.
Anecdotal, obviously, but we don't know if it's fully there. That said, it's probably not a surprise. I mean, because this was long predicted. I'm even looking here at Tampa Bay Business Journal. They have a headline that just came out literally yesterday saying immigration law could significantly impact Florida's construction and agriculture industries. Here again, though, I'm just like, okay, yeah, that's true. It is true that enforcing the law will have consequences. That doesn't mean that it's a bad idea. It just means like, okay, well, then we need a process through which we can rectify this mismatch in the way that apparently all construction and agriculture operates with under-the-table illegal labor, and we're all just supposed to be cool with that. That just doesn't seem like a good status quo. And look, I'm not saying it doesn't have consequences, but maybe consequences are worth it.
Well, we have people have a couple significant complaints about life in America right now. One is that housing is too expensive.
Very true.
Two is that food is too expensive.
All true.
This policy will drive up the prices of all of those things substantially. I think the big mistake we made came actually, ironically, when we hardened the border and made it much more difficult for seasonal laborers to go back and forth between Mexico and Central America and the United States, because we had this incorrect sense that people who were coming here to work the fields, to work construction jobs and sending money home, didn't want to live in Mexico or El Salvador and Honduras. They really, really wanted to live in the United States. And it's kind of a chauvinistic, almost quaint, cute idea that really our country's so awesome that everybody wants to move here. No, in fact, they wanted to come here, work really, really hard for 4 months, send money back home, relax back at home with their families, do work back there, and then come back, make American money again, send money back home, and keep that going. We did that. That worked for like 100 years or something like that. And then we said, no, you're not doing that anymore. So now all of a sudden, you had all of these migrant laborers who are now trapped north of the wall, north of this hard border. So then they send for their families to come up with them too, and you start then they start building roots here in the country, and so we've always had a system where we don't pay $15 to $30 an hour for fruit pickers. Like that's
but I think we should. And look, if strawberries cost more, like they cost more. And I think that's kind of what I'm getting at. Is like I just feel like some of this is almost reverse chauvinism, as in the idea is that strawberries can only be picked by people who aren't from here. It's like, well, wait, why not? I mean, people will do anything for the right wage. It's just that the wage is low.
But we have a system that the second that wages start to rise, our system, our Fed chair, whoever it is, in whatever party,
nuke the economy,
is going to watch them be like, you know what? We have too many people working. We need to push wages back down. So we have built a system in which wages can't go up. And so the only thing you can do is then allow people to do labor arbitrage, where the amount of money that they're making in the field isn't a lot if they're going to live full time in Florida, but it would allow them to actually have a nice life and send enough money back to Guatemala.
No defense here of the Federal Reserve, or I'm more just saying, like, something has got to give. In my opinion, I'd rather the Fed give and not, U.S. immigration law, where you actually effectively have a complete lawless system. And we have no idea how many people are even here in the U.S. illegally. Literally none, because there's no proper census. Right. And then yet somehow we do have a census, and yet they also count whenever it comes to the Electoral College. Somebody go ahead and riddle me, even though they can't vote. Riddle me that one. I still have never exactly gotten my head around that. And I think that generally comes, and look, I hate bringing personal stuff into this, but it cost my parents thousands of dollars to become citizens of this country. It's a pain in the ass to go through the green card process. You can't just waltz into any other country on earth and just say, you know what, I'm staying here. I want to go to work, and and you can't do anything to me. Try doing that in literally anywhere else, and they'll laugh at you and throw you out almost immediately. Do I think we should be above that? Yeah. But that doesn't mean that we have to have such a permissive system as what we have right now. I have nothing but empathy and compassion for people who want to come here. Obviously, everybody on Earth, a lot of people on Earth at least, want to come to the United States. But that also doesn't mean you have a right to do it based on your terms. It's supposed to be a mutually beneficial transaction, not something where it's just up to one person. And I guess the populace itself doesn't get a real vote. And I think that's where some of the what you referenced earlier, that is where the tougher mindset comes from. You're like, hey, hold on. They're like, this is not fair. And I think that's what's reflected, I think, in the polling, Ryan. Yeah.
But I guess who's going to do these jobs? I mean,
I just see no reason why Americans can. I mean, listen. I mean, if I was younger and came from a different background, and if it was $18 an hour, like maybe I would do it, you know, or maybe a lot of Americans would do it. Like there's no reason why American citizens can't do these jobs. It's just that a lot of them don't want to because it's very cheap.
Then strawberries and orange juice just become luxury items for the super rich.
And I agree that doesn't necessarily mean. I mean, listen, eggs, for example, have not gone up in price since 1970. You want to know why? And it's because of an aggressive government subsidy program. Well, I see no reason why.
Recently, when we had to kill 1 billion birds.
We had crazy egg inflation. We're actually below overall inflation. Fun update for everybody. But overall, in the aggregate, egg prices have not risen for a long period. Why? Because we just decided as a society, we're like, yeah, you know what? We're just not going to charge more for eggs. You're like, so I don't know why you don't necessarily can't do the same thing for other products. Although, you know, that's the big government part of me.
Now you're talking. If you want massive government subsidies to lift low-income people up into a middle-class
I've always wanted that. That's all I've ever advocated for on the show.
Works for me.
Okay, let's go to the next one here. Tim Scott throwing his hand in the ring. We put together a compilation of his pitch, why he thinks he can be, the new Reagan in this race against Donald Trump. Here's what he had to say.
Hello, North Charleston! And for those of you who wonder if it's possible for a broken kid in a broken home to rise beyond their circumstances, the answer is yes. And our nation are standing at a time for choosing victimhood or victory. Victimhood or victory. Victimhood or victory. Grievance or greatness. I choose freedom and hope and opportunity. Will you choose it with me? Will you join me as messengers of hope, as missionaries that believe that the strength of our ideas can change our nation again? I will. Let's go. Let's go. Let's go. Let's go. Let's go.
Wow, certainly something.
Is he running for vice president there? What's your read?
I think he's genuinely running for president. So I don't know if a lot of people understand this, but people who are in the Senate love Tim Scott. They love this guy. Personally, I don't get it. But John Thune, the #2 Republican in the GOP caucus, he spoke at the introduction for Tim Scott, endorsed him. A lot of others, fellow senators, really want him to run. You know, on a personal level, he's built up a lot of relationships with them. But honestly, I think he believes it. And here's the thing. It only takes maybe one billionaire, maybe named Larry Ellison, to underrate your entire campaign for the guy who's worth, like, what is he worth today? Like 90 billion or something like that, the founder of Oracle. Here's the other thing. Trump himself is welcoming Tim Scott into the race. Put this up there on the screen. Trump says, good luck to Senator Tim Scott in entering the Republican presidential race. It is rapidly loading up with lots of people. Tim is a big step up from Ron DeSanctimonious, who is totally unelectable. I got opportunity zones done with Tim, a big deal that has been highly successful. Good luck, Tim. Here's the thing. Everyone was trying to understand, like, why is Trump not attacking Tim Scott, but he attacks Ron DeSantis? It's obvious, Ryan, because he knows Tim Scott is not a threat to him, and DeSantis actually is. Thus, the more people who jump in the race, the better off he is. He even alludes to it. It is rapidly loading up with lots of people. He's not an idiot. He knows that that's why he won in 2016. And guess what? They're proving him right. Tim Scott's in the race. Chris Christie's want to throw his hat in the ring. Chris Sununu, the governor of North Dakota, will save you. The next one, Glenn Youngkin, plot twist, we'll do a whole block on that. In a second, also thinks that he wants to throw his hat there in the ring. And, you know, look, I got to be honest here. This down market Reagan pitch from the 1980s, it's like, who is this for? I get why Senate GOP voters want it, but how can you look at the politics of Donald Trump and his popularity with the GOP base and think that's what people want right now. Even DeSantis, what did we just do a whole block on? Immigration, one of the strictest immigration laws in the country. Why? Because he knows that's what GOP voters want. This comes from a place of being on the back foot, of feeling like we got to take something. Like, that's not the forward message that that people want. Right. I mean, it didn't win in 2016. And it's not 1979 right now. It's a very different time.
And I think Tim Scott there is doing a bit of a kind of racial politics bank shot.
How so?
So what I hear from that is he's telling Republican voters that none of you are racist or bigoted because you're all supporting me. And you saw Herman Cain rising in 2012.
999.
In ways that were very explicit, where people were very explicit in their support for him. But then secondly, look at the rhetoric that he used: victimhood versus victory, victimhood, and then grievance.
See, I read that as a shot at Trump. I'm surprised you read that as a shot at the left.
I read.
Well, I mean, it can be both, but I do think that Trump is locked into that.
I read it as playing into the kind of Trump supporter or Republican mindset that, look, yes, slavery was bad, yes, redlining was bad, but we had the civil rights movement, and everyone is equal now in the United States. Stop playing victim and stop just leading with your grievances. Let's be more optimistic. Let's look for opportunity.
Sure, I guess when you put it that way,
so
I
thought that was kind of how he was coding himself. But I feel like it's much more of a 2012 message.
Yes, and that's kind of what I was getting
than a 2024.
Right. Yeah, I'm totally with you. I think that I would say instead I read it as a shot at Trump. At least that's how I saw the initial report. And
interesting. I could see that, but
because the grievance is
maybe it's a double going for both.
It's a double entendre. Yes. Let's put this up there on the screen. It's important, as I noted before, some of the people who were spotted at the VIP section. One of them, Mark Sanford,
Appalachian Trail.
Appalachian Trail Mark. John Thune, as I alluded to, and billionaire Larry Ellison, the multi-billionaire Republican donor who loves Tim Scott. Scott is like made in a lab to appeal to some of these Republican voters who are like, we just want, a really nice guy, like somebody who's not like Trump. And the problem is that that's not what the voters want. And, even if you saw the energy, I mean, there was not a whole lot of, at least to me, my personal observation, I was not seeing a lot of organic enthusiasm there. And he really kind of had to goad the crowd into cheering. Whereas Ryan, I'm not sure if you've been, but if you've ever been to a Trump event, you don't have to goad those people into doing anything. All right, like they are ready to roll.
They've been tailgating.
Yeah, they've been tailgating. It's so hard to explain to people who haven't been to various different political events, but Trump events are something like, literally, it's like being at a concert. It's like being at a football game. If you've covered politics professionally, as you and I have, there's nothing else in all of politics like it. Some Bernie rallies came close. I will give him that. But Bernie also kind of became a bit of a lifestyle thing. But Trump and Bernie, they are in another league compared to what I'm seeing at right there.
And the concert analogy is a good one because you have a lot of people in the crowd who are hoping he'll play certain songs.
Yes, that's right.
play the hits, man.
Yeah, he's got his, you can't always get what you want, that he walks out on or walks away from. They love it. Then some of them go to all of them.
But then some of his riffs, they want to hear those too. It's like, oh, is he going to do the toilet riff?
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. The snake.
Are we going to get that one?
I used to know the snake by heart. I can't say it anymore. For those who don't know, it's a great old Trumpism. Let's go to the next part here that you flagged for us, Ryan, and put it up there on the screen. Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin is reconsidering his 2024 bid. Now, the reason why this is interesting is he had already ruled it out in April. Whenever he was asked whether he was going to run for president, he said, quote, "Listen, I didn't write a book. I'm not in Iowa or New Hampshire or South Carolina. I am wholly focused on the Commonwealth of Virginia." However, apparently that has changed in the last few months. Why? Well, it's exactly what we covered yesterday. It's because DeSantis, apparently to Youngkin and to many others, is looking rockier. And Youngkin is thinking, hey, why not me? He says, quote, one of his top advisors told Axios he's reconsidering. He'd be in his own lane. He's not never Trump, and he's not Trump light. A top Virginia GOP strategist told Axios there, quote, serious discussions happening on re-engaging in the presidential race. I did take notice, definitely, Ryan, after he dropped this like Morning in America type video on Twitter 2 days ago, and I was like, what are we doing here? You know, this ain't about Virginia. And can you also explain the convoluted gubernatorial process in Virginia?
Right.
This is why you kind of would want to run for president.
Right. You can be governor again, but not consecutively.
Exactly.
So he's out after this one term.
Yeah.
And so, he's got to find something else to do or go back to Carlisle. And so I think that if you think about Ron DeSantis as sort of like a cork that was keeping the kind of champagne of the Republican primary in the bottle, without his strength anymore, it's uncorked and everybody's coming out.
Right.
Because now, like, we're not going to hold back for DeSantis anymore because DeSantis seems kind of blood in the water, which is quite a reflection. Because that, if you think back to when he was saying he wasn't going to challenge Trump or DeSantis was
doing better,
doing much better.
I mean, and look, a lot can change. DeSantis is literally not even in the race, and apparently we're writing his obituary, which, we have to be careful of, right? Be like, look, he is certainly entering at a disadvantage, but, we've never seen him go up against Trump. At the same time, though, I view it in the same way that I look at the Tim Scott decision, which is, at the end of the day, Tim Scott entering the race it's a zero-sum game. He thinks, I'm better than Ron DeSantis. I'm the guy who can go up against Trump. Nikki Haley doing the same thing. Vivek Ramaswamy doing the same thing. Asa Hutchinson doing the same thing. And what do we learn from all of those people? At an individual level, all of them are doing the right thing. But on a macro level, like if you really believe that Trump is so awful, then you're actually drawing votes away from Ron DeSantis. There's no question about it. You're splitting the field. And Youngkin, look, I don't think Youngkin would ever place that high in a Republican primary. But 4%, 5%, why not? Also, I don't know if people remember this, Virginia is a very important Super Tuesday state, and of which Marco Rubio won last time. I believe it was the only state that even won in 2016. Well, they've got a decent amount of delegates. So now you just robbed DeSantis of a headline probably, or maybe reduced his headline that he would have gotten otherwise in a sweeping victory. Yeah. So again, I pointed this out yesterday, Obama is the reason that the Klobuchar and Buttigieg dropped out in 2020.
Right.
But the GOP does not have that same forcing function for somebody to come in and be like, hey man, you had your chance, it's time to go. Nobody's doing that. No, RNC has no credibility, and Trump himself, he wants as many people in there as possible, and it looks like he's getting his wish.
Right, and one thing that was keeping people out was the nervousness that Trump was going to turn them toxic.
Right.
Like he did to Rubio.
Yes.
Or to Christie to some degree.
Yeah.
And so for him to welcome Tim Scott in and tells other candidates, come on in and bask in my love. That's right. I only hate Ron DeSanctimonious, not you. You're fine.
Yes, and look, I think it's a problem for Ron. I think it's the biggest loser in all of this is Ron DeSantis, especially if Youngkin comes in, because what did we just point out? Youngkin not only could draw from him politically, more importantly, he could draw him from the money. Like he has, not only is he personally wealthy, but he knows a lot of these traditional GOP donors. Northern Virginia is like the hotbed of, GOP consultants, number one. Two, literally used to work for the Carlyle Group and private equity, defense contractors, and all of that. So he would have money well enough to stay in the race, and he would have enough money to stay throughout the time period and also draw money away that would otherwise go to Ron DeSantis for donors who otherwise would not want Trump to run. So overall, this would be a huge blow to DeSantis. For Youngkin himself, I'm not sure. I'm not sure what he has to lose by running, actually, since he can't be governor anyways. So he's in a tougher spot than most. Let's go. Oh, if you want.
We got a new dispatch from the DEI Chronicles, right?
That's right. We have our favorite dispatch from the DEI Chronicles and what's happening here. I love this. It's everything to me. Put this up there on the screen. Uber has now put its Asian diversity chief on leave after employees, mostly led by some black employee groups, complained about sessions called Don't Call Me Karen that were intended to explore the American white woman experience. So she was put on leave after black employee, or I should not say black employees, some black employee groups, which maybe represent some portion of black employees at Uber, complained to management that they felt like they were being lectured about the American white woman experience and that it was inappropriate for that to be included because they did not view Karen as a slur. Now, I would not put that in a racial slur category, but if the overall ethos of Uber is we don't judge people by the color of their skin, and we want all employees to be aware of the personal individual struggles that each individual human being is outside of their race, then a Don't Call Me Karen session seems perfectly appropriate and fine. Now, especially given the amount of 1619 nonsense that most of these companies force upon their employees on a weekly basis. So one, Don't Call Me Karen session, though, was apparently, though, enough, Ryan, to trigger some of these groups and has now led to the capitulation by the CEO of Uber, who has put this lady on leave and has now ignited a crisis within the company and is causing lots of consternation. It is also humorous to me because it shows you that the DEI in practicality really means basically like whatever white fragility Robin DiAngelo nonsense that is. It doesn't actually mean real diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that's why I reject the term and the entire practice, and I think it's a complete grift and a farce. What did you make of this?
The kind of funniest part of it was the way that the language was the same going in both directions, just with the shoes on the other foot. You have this, so the DEI boss responded to the complaints by, quote, telling the women that while the conversation may have been uncomfortable, sometimes being pushed out of your own strategic ignorance is the right thing to do. That is exactly what DEI bosses say to white people who go through these sessions and come out and say, you made me feel bad about being white. And they say, look, too bad.
You gotta be uncomfortable.
You have to be uncomfortable because in that discomfort is where you find your insights.
Instead, all evidence says that in the discomfort, you become more racist. And,
right. So, I mean, forget the actual evidence, but what they say is that the discomfort is a good thing. So she used that same line back to these women who were protesting, saying, sometimes being pushed out of your own strategic ignorance is the right thing to do.
Okay.
And that didn't work for her. That blew up right in her face.
Blew up in her face.
Yeah, that was
so they're not allowed to be uncomfortable, but you have to be uncomfortable. Got it. So it seems like discomfort's supposed to go
later
one way.
Later, as they're applauding the fact that they got her suspended, one of the women is like, "This sounds a little bit too much like what police do." So there was a little bit of maybe the kind of regret at their victory.
Yes.
That it might have creeped into the carceral territory. Because then you're reproducing the same anti-abolitionist tendencies that you are fighting against.
Got it.
But separately, can we step back for a second and note that all of these managers and workers at Uber are getting paid by the exploited labor
I was
of
about
mostly
to say that.
black and brown
I was
drivers.
about to say that. Which is
their job is to figure out how to extract as much money from struggling gig workers as possible so that they can then pay to have these sessions where they accuse each other.
That's the great irony of it all, isn't it? Is that all of that is built upon 1099 contract labor, of which they have spent and built a multi-billion-dollar business exploiting. Now, maybe you're okay with that, but I would just say that when you look at the very basics, both on the consumer level and on the worker level, we have gotten to a very bad place. Because has anyone taken an Uber lately? They're actually really expensive. They're just as expensive as cabs. So now Ubers are just as expensive as cabs, except now the driver doesn't have any benefits. And it's like, I mean, look, I like the technology, it's nice, and it's convenient. But somewhere in the happy middle, we disaggregated driver from benefits, and we basically rolled up that benefit into a company stock called Uber. And that is what is paying for all of this nonsense happening when they're supposed to be doing work. So this is a good view into what's real exploitation. Being, a highly paid black executive at Uber having to sit through a "Don't Call Me Karen," or being somebody who loses their job, has no opportunities except but to drive for Uber, and just burns their car into the ground in terms of its depreciating value while driving from 2 a.m. to the 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. shift for drunk people.
Right.
Sounds pretty miserable.
And absorbing all the risk.
Yeah.
The people who are executives at Uber are not the ones who are going to get vomit in the backseat of their car or possibly
and then be like, no,
assaulted.
they only vomited on half the car, so here's half the reimbursement or something like that. And look, sure, there's some benefit or whatever to some people who want to drive Uber and all of that, but we have to still get to a better medium as a society about making sure that people are not taken advantage of and don't have access to the very basics of benefits and are protected, even from, they're the ones who have to buy the cars, maintain the cars and all of that. And it's a real issue, that I've seen for a lot of people.
And what is Uber? It's Google Maps with PayPal on it.
Yeah.
The actual innovation of Uber is exploitation. They're just figuring out ways to take all of the risk involved in the actual work and put it on
them.
The worker, the contractor. They don't even call him an employee.
And on a more meta
and then
level,
extract all the profits.
One of the reasons why, a session like Don't Call Me Karen may be valuable for people is what did we all just go through? Put this up there on the screen. This lady in New York City who was accused in a viral video of stealing a city bike from a couple of black teenagers or young men who had surrounded her, was ridiculed and defamed, really, online, called the New York City Karen. Well, it turns out that records provided to media outlets and to others show that she genuinely did pay for the city bike in question at the center of this viral fight, and now is looking to actually sue some of the people who defamed her online as some sort of racist, which is leading to, Ryan, a bunch of deleted tweets across the internet from people who are like, no, I never said that, and from media outlets adding substantial and large corrections as to what happened here. And, every time I see one of these things, I think the same thing. It's like, not a great look for either party, but I wasn't there. I have no idea what preceded it or came after. I'm going to withhold judgment. And it turns out, that's exactly the right move. And so jumping on some viral video and immediately, Karen and all of that doesn't genuinely lead to the best results. If anything, what have you underscored for a lot of people? There probably are scenarios where people, actually not probably, there definitely are scenarios where people falsely accuse black youths of committing crimes. And now, though, you have set up a situation where people who always want to disbelieve that are like, no, this is just like the NYC Karen, or vice versa. Where every single time that you see somebody in this scenario, you're like, oh, well, that person is lying, or, we want to try and, we've gotten to the point now where the default whenever you see these videos is, I'm going to withhold judgment and I'm not going to jump to conclusions because we've been burned so many times on fakes, which was the exact point of the Don't Call Me Karen session.
And it reminds, I think, everybody a little bit of the Nicholas Sandman case. Remember the little kid with the MAGA hat?
Yes.
Who
and the drums. And
is one of the richest people in the country now because...
he's good for him. Right.
But one thing that both had in common, and I don't say this in a defamatory way, you watch the video and they both look like kind of punks in the video.
Right. What's happening here?
Yeah, none of them, neither of them looked good in the interactions.
To me, I was just like, what an odd situation. To find yourself in.
Right, and the nurse, the crying and the she seems all.
Yeah, listen, to me it seemed a bit histrionic. Although apparently she's pregnant. Right? So I'm willing to cut her.
She's 5 months pregnant.
I'm really cut her some slack.
And just finished a 12-hour shift.
Right.
That's more work than I've done in 20 years.
Correct. Yeah.
Including never been pregnant.
Yes.
That's not doing it pregnant.
Yeah.
And just to explain to people how this all unfolded, so the way that these city bikes work, you use them. Everybody's used them. Probably you put your phone in there.
Yeah, you pay for it.
It's yours. You unlock it. Right. Apparently, the kids grabbed her bike and kind of nudged her until it locked again. She then unlocked it a second time, pulled it out, and if she would have lost it to that kid, if she would have said, you know what, fine, you take it, she's liable for $1,200 if the kids don't return that bike.
Right.
And if you're the kids and you didn't sign, why don't you just keep it at that point? And so what she was able to show through her lawyer was a receipt that she had it for 2 minutes and then ended the trip, and then a receipt again that she got it and took it home.
Got it.
And so that really fits with the story that it was hers, because that changes everything. Because now these are people in an urban environment who are competing for scarce resources. She had it first. Like, those are the rules. Like, she had it first. Go get your own scooter.
Yeah, I think it's sad. I hope that, I think public confrontations of any kind, A, make me deeply uncomfortable, and B, I do my absolute best to avoid them at all costs. And I also,
it's not worth it.
That was going to say, that would be my advice and I would just walk away. You really don't want to be.
It sucks, but
it sucks. It sucks. I've been there, where you just, all you want to do is say something or whatever, and you're like, you know what, this is, all this is going to lead to is trouble. That's not a justification for the behavior. It's more on an individual level. It's like, and the meta takeaway is that the "Don't Call Me Karen" session seems perfectly vindicated.
People needed it.
Yeah, it turns out people did need it because
their strategic ignorance backfired here.
There's major strategic. It turns out all of us do need to be, or instead of being uncomfortable and having this, we can have more helpful societal-wide lessons, which is, hey, why are we all talking about diversity, equity, inclusion at Uber when we have a Black and brown workforce which is struggling? Maybe if we flipped things on that end, it would be a little bit better.
We could also be like, look, imagine if this is your mama, and like when you're on a train, you see a pregnant woman, you stand up, you give them the seat.
Well, you would hope so. When I lived in New York, unfortunately, many people did not do
that. Even if it is your scooter.
Yeah.
The pregnant nurse coming out.
Yeah, it's just like, just give it.
You know what?
Damn bite.
And thank you for your service.
Yeah, I'm with you 100%.
All right, Saagar, what are you looking at?
Well, there's been a lot of media lying about Ukraine over the last few days, somehow trying to spin their defeat in Bakhmut as some sort of real victory, trying to say giving them F-16s no risk to the United States. But perhaps the most insane story that has received basically no scrutiny is a dishonest trick pulled by the Biden administration to send them even more weapons and illegally usurp the power of Congress. Let's dive in. The news broke over the weekend. The Pentagon is claiming with a straight face it has suddenly discovered it accidentally overvalued the amount of aid sent to Ukraine. This miraculous discovery means that they can actually send $3 billion more to Ukraine than previously thought. The way they achieved this was an illegal accounting gimmick by claiming that they had accidentally priced weaponry sent from U.S. stocks to Ukraine at too high of a value. Now, how exactly did they accomplish that? According to their methods, they originally priced all Ukraine aid based on the dollar value it would cost U.S. taxpayers to replace it, which, seems like the right definition when you pay for something and then you give it to somebody else. But the new definition instead prices the weapons not at the original price, but then depreciates those assets over time, as if this is some real estate or heavy equipment that you can sell in the future, and not literal guns, bullets, and bombs. A more simple way of describing this is BS. Of course, they have given themselves plenty of breathing room. The Pentagon now says that $3 billion is just what they found so far. They told reporters in Congress if they go back and depreciate all the weapons, they can probably find even more. It's just a coincidence that because of the current political makeup of Congress, that no more aid can pass to Ukraine legally, and that Ukraine itself says that they're running out of bullets and ammo. Further, it just so happened to come in May, just months before the projected expenditure of all U.S. aid was likely to run out for Ukraine. So what is so disgusting about this is not just the Pentagon's accounting trick, it's that this is illegal. Congress decides the power of the purse. They have given the administration a lot of leeway, zero restrictions really, on the type of aid. But even on this, the White House cannot stop. Listen to their ridiculous explanation when they are asked about it.
There was this very bizarre admission from the Pentagon this week of an accounting error that suggested that the U.S. has at least $3 billion that it didn't know it had that it can use for Ukraine aid. That's a hell of an accounting error, and it provides a lot of fodder to critics of U.S. aid to Ukraine and critics who say there's not enough oversight going on. Are you concerned about this accounting error?
Well, one thing I just want to make clear, that is not money that went out the door and disappeared. That is not a waste of that $3 billion. It is simply a tally of how much military equipment we have given them. And the way that the Pentagon was counting it was, what's the replacement cost for the equipment we provide, rather than just the actual cost of that equipment. Once you make that adjustment, it turns out we have an additional $3 billion that we can spend to provide even more weapons.
Yep. Turns out, that's all you got to do. They're not even lying about it. They're so brazen about their illegal cost circumvention. The reason this is nuts is because $3 billion out of the $40 billion in appropriated funds for military aid, do the math. That's 7.5%. So are we really saying the entire military budget is so fudgy that you can make it look basically however you want, plus or minus 8%? If that's the case, why do we keep giving them so much damn money? Just make them inflate their own books. Also, how much should we really even trust the Pentagon's accounting team? 7 months ago, they failed their 5th audit in a row, where they were only able to account for 39% of $3.5 trillion in assets under management. Not only that, after failing their 4th audit in 2021, they promised that they would do better. And it turns out they made 0 progress in that audit at all in 1 year. The same number of areas that they were unable to account for did not change whatsoever in a 1-year period. How does the Pentagon ghouls account for this? You already know. They pretend it literally doesn't exist. Let's just relive one of my favorite clips from Jon Stewart's confrontation with the number 2 official at the Pentagon.
To be doing. Like, there is a lot of waste, fraud, and abuse within a system.
Audits and waste, fraud, and abuse are not the same thing. So let's decompose these pieces.
Please educate me on
Sure.
What
so an audit is exactly what you just described, which is, do I know what was delivered to which place?
Right.
The ability to pass an audit, or the fact that the DoD has not passed an audit, is not suggestive of waste, fraud, and abuse. That is completely false right there. So
what is
now it's a question of, it's suggestive that we don't have an accurate inventory that we can pull up of what we have where. That is not the same as saying we can't do that because waste, fraud, and abuse has occurred.
So in my world,
yeah,
that's waste.
How is that waste?
If I give you $1 billion and you can't tell me what happened to it, that to me is wasteful. That means you are not responsible. But if you can't tell me where it went, then what am I supposed to think? And when there has been reporting, I mean, this is not, look, I'm not saying this is on you and that you caused this, but I think it's a tough argument to make that. I'm pretty sure I didn't cause it. an $850 billion budget to an organization that can't pass an audit and tell you where that money went, like, I think most people would consider that somewhere in the realm of waste, fraud, or abuse, because they would wonder why that money isn't well accounted for.
Stewart goes on to blast her to her face for justifying corruption, but you get the point. You really believe they're just doing their due diligence, or are they cooking the books for Ukraine? Maybe you're okay with that in this case, if you're one of those NAFO people. But ask yourself this: what about the next conflict, or the one after that? What if you oppose that one? You want to set the continued global war on terror precedent, where the office of the president can just do whatever they want whenever it comes to fighting wars in places that you did not even vote for? That is basically where we are right now with Ukraine. And given what we have covered this morning in terms of Ukraine's cross-border activities, its new F-16s will soon make their way there, their recent loss of Bakhmut, you can rest assured this is only the latest last-ditch effort to ship everything that is not nailed down to the floor over there. For those who are silent on this, I hope and I pray you live to see this same authority used by a president that you hate to prop up a conflict that you don't support, because that is how principles are supposed to work and why you didn't violate them in the first place. I mean, it's just so obvious, Ryan. It's basically they're using the global war on terror precedent that was set where they can do whatever they want. And, the Congress comes out and says that they support it. That's the crazy part. The bipartisan heads of the committees in the House were like, oh, okay, that's fantastic news. Let's shift. And you're like, wait, you did not vote for that. Like, it is so obvious that replacement cost is what should be used here. The cost to replace the good. And instead, they're acting like real estate billionaires depreciating, accelerating depreciation on their taxes, for a global conflict just to get around the power of the purse that's supposed to be in our judicial or in our legal system.
Also, if it costs $3 billion more to replace it, you're not driving a very good bargain.
Yeah, this is a terrible deal.
You're a monopsony. You're like the U.S. military. You're the one. If you don't buy from Boeing, Boeing's done. Like, who are they going to sell their weapons to?
Right. So what's happening here?
So drive a better bargain. But yes, they're just making numbers up.
It's just literally made up.
Did they negotiate with Ukraine, or they just look at a book and obviously they didn't negotiate, because Ukraine is like, well, it's your money that we're using to buy it.
Correct.
So you just charge us what you say you want to charge us, and so we just change the number that we're going to charge. We could just keep doing that. Mm-hmm. I mean, also, technically, be like, oh, actually, we didn't want those bombs anyway. Those were free.
But that's what we're saying, is that basically that's what we're doing at this point. We're basically just going to write off. It's like, what, we're going to write off everything, be like, oh, we're never going to use it. So it actually was free. We didn't ever pay. It's like, well, hold on. So somebody got paid something for this weapon.
There's a great Seinfeld episode where Kramer's like, they're just going to write it off. It's like, what do you mean write it off? Yeah, they write it off.
But that's what's happening. That's actually true. And I come back to the precedent. you know, what if Trump is in office and let's say he's waging a war in Yemen or something like that? You could do this. You could be like, hey, listen, we haven't given anything to Saudi Arabia. We just depreciated the assets and we made it, you know, zero and we transferred it. A transfer is different than giving something. Yes. And you're like, well, but I previously set the precedent where the president can do basically whatever they want. Oh, but you don't support that now? Yeah, well, unfortunately, you set the precedent now. So now we're just getting to an even more of a lawless presidency and no congressional input on the ability to wage war overseas.
Now, if I were going to defend Ukraine here or defend the Pentagon, let's say I give you my old Chevy and it costs me $30,000 to get a new Chevy. And I'm like, well, I want $30,000 because that's what it costs to replace my Chevy.
Right.
You'd be like, yeah, but I got your old one.
Yes, you are correct.
So I don't want, I'm not giving you $30,000 for this, I'm giving you $10,000 for this.
But in that transaction, you presumed that I paid you for that Chevy, and instead you actually gave it
used
to me.
my money.
So I got it something for free. So you're the only one who really has to make up
It was my
anything.
money, I gave you the money.
Right,
Yeah.
so that's why I wouldn't have any standing. It's a little bit different whenever I'm actually
Now
buying
I can give you 3 Chevys.
Yeah, well, there you go. So then we're in a totally different world, right? So when somebody's actually paying for something, that's why those transactions are different, as opposed to when somebody gets something, and then the taxpayer is the one who gets billed in order to replace that aid. So basically, we all just paid $3 billion extra in order to replace all this, because it all has to get replaced. You know that. You know, it's not going to sit empty. No, but I'm saying they will. They're going to do it.
Yeah.
So, and who's going to pay for that? All of us. We're the ones who get to pay. Congratulations. Ryan, what are you taking a look at?
From the moment Joe Biden announced his candidacy for president, the biggest risk the country faced was that he would wind up in high-stakes negotiations with Republican congressional leaders, and those Republicans would fleece him blind. Now, for months, Biden insisted that he wouldn't ever be in that room because he simply wasn't going to negotiate with Republicans over lifting the debt ceiling. Except he also poured cold water on the 14th Amendment and the platinum coin and all the other things, which handed Republicans all of the leverage. Biden also had the chance to lift the debt ceiling when Democrats controlled Congress, and he didn't do so. This was a rare opportunity for Biden to actually deliver this line and mean it.
Senator, you can have my answer now if you like. My offer is this: nothing.
Instead, Biden went into negotiations and also didn't make a serious offer of his own. He's made a few half-hearted suggestions that a way to cut the deficit that would be better is to target hedge fund managers and the super rich, but when McCarthy objected, he just dropped it. So now he's negotiating the size of the cut, and Democrats' only hope is that Republicans can't get their own party together to agree on what they want, and they fail to seize the moment the same way they did back in 2011. And all of this reminds me of the last time Biden, as vice president, intervened in high-stakes Capitol Hill negotiations. Afterwards, Harry Reid ordered the White House to never send him down Pennsylvania Avenue again. He did such a poor job, he got a worse deal out of Mitch McConnell than McConnell had already agreed to give Harry Reid. The circumstances were similar. I covered this moment in my last book, We've Got People, and this came at the end of the year 2012. So Obama had just stomped Republican Mitt Romney at the polls, if you remember, in a post-Occupy Wall Street campaign that centered on economic inequality. Democrats picked up 2 seats in the Senate, expanded their majority to 53, adding Elizabeth Warren to their ranks. And though Democrats won more House votes nationwide and picked up a net of 8 seats, Republicans still held on to the House narrowly. Now, the Bush tax cuts were set to expire at the end of 2012, creating what was called a fiscal cliff. If Congress did nothing, taxes would go up on everybody, but especially on the rich. Harry Reid told me in an interview for that book that going over the cliff was precisely his plan. Reid said, quote, "I thought that would have been the best thing to do because the conversation would not have been about raising taxes, which it became. It would have been about lowering taxes. In other words, let all the rates go up and then bargain with Republicans to reduce taxes just for the middle class and the working poor." Minority Leader Mitch McConnell similarly knew that the difficult position going over the cliff would put him in, and in talks with Reid, he agreed to let rates on people making more than $250,000 per year go back up. McConnell had a strong sense that Reid intended to go over the cliff and put Republicans up against a wall. Reid felt like he had successfully pushed McConnell to the brink. So it was now Sunday, December 30th, 2012, and Democrats only had to hold out until that Tuesday to find themselves in a dramatically improved political position, as the dawning of the new year would mean the tax cuts expired and automatically reverted to pre-Bush levels. At that point, it would be Republicans who would be left pleading for those rate cuts. In desperation, Mitch McConnell reached out directly to Joe Biden, calling him on the phone and explaining that Reid was refusing to be reasonable. Over the course of the day, McConnell and Biden struck a deal. A former McConnell aide told me Biden gave Republicans everything they wanted in exchange for fixing the fiscal cliff problem. But just like today, the fiscal cliff problem was only a problem because Biden allowed it to be a problem. Harry Reid was happy to drive the car off the cliff and then fight it out amid the wreckage. In the same way, Biden could just ignore the debt ceiling, invoke the 14th Amendment, and dare John Roberts to then blow up the global economy. On the morning of New Year's Eve, Reid was still feeling good about his position, ignorant of what Biden had given away. Then Mitch McConnell took to the Senate floor and announced that he'd been in talks with the vice president. They were progressing well, and he was hopeful that they'd have legislation to move by the end of the day. As details of the deal began leaking out, progressive Democratic senators were floored. A large group of them, including Bernie Sanders, Sherrod Brown, Jeff Merkley, Sheldon Whitehouse, Al Franken, and Tom Harkin of Iowa, stormed over to Harry Reid's office. The deal was awful, they told Reid, and it had to be stopped. Reid told them what had happened, that it was out of his hands and that McConnell had gone around him directly to Biden. He said he was working on improving it and would be in touch throughout the day. Now, none of the senators had any business scheduled. It was New Year's Eve, after all. So Bernie Sanders invited them back to his office in the Dirksen building. The Hart building has a popcorn machine, so our Harkin asked his staff to bring some by. The crew ended up spending several hours together in Sanders' office thinking through potential strategies of opposition, waiting to hear from Reid, and chewing on popcorn. Instead, one senator's phone rang, and it was Joe Biden calling to sell the deal that he had cut. In classic Biden fashion, he offered up a 10 to 15-minute soliloquy, a meandering argument that largely boiled down to, "You can trust me. I'm your friend. This is a good deal." The senator could barely get a word in before the conversation ended. Moments after he hung up, another cell phone rang, and it was Biden again. Unaware that the group was all together, Biden proceeded to call each of them one after the other, delivering the same spiel. Ultimately, it fell to Reid to drag the progressive senators into line. Once it was clear that the White House was on board with Biden's deal and McConnell was all in, that meant that there would be at least 70 or 80 votes for it. The progressive bloc could vote no, but it would only send a message of discord and have no effect on the outcome, Reid told them, coaxing them to support the deal he himself loathed. In the end, all the progressive senators, including Bernie, except for Tom Harkin, voted for the deal. It passed 89-8. Years later, Reid still regretted how it went down. He told me, quote, "If we'd have gone over the cliff, we'd have had resources to do a lot of good things in this country, infrastructure, development, but it didn't work out that way. Letting all the tax rates go back to pre-Bush levels would have yielded the Treasury around $3 trillion over 10 years. Without the deal, taxes on dividend payments to the rich would have been set at 39.6%. Under the terms of the deal, they would be set at 20% instead, meaning that the super wealthy would be paying lower taxes on their passive dividend income than many working people pay on their wages. It helped fuel the inequality that keeps getting worse, and it added trillions to the debt at the same time. Now Biden has another chance to be in the room, and so far, he's getting outmaneuvered, Saagar, by Kevin McCarthy.
Yes.
Which is perhaps the greatest negotiating indictment that you could ever come up with.
What do you think generally about his past record and the way that he's currently handled himself? The overall take that I've heard from people in the know is, I don't understand how a guy who was Obama's vice president, served in the Senate, didn't know that we should have passed the debt ceiling while we had control of both houses.
And going back to your point that you made earlier, there's this fear in Washington. If you can kick something down the road, you kick it down the road. And so they're cobbling together the votes for the American Rescue Plan, which really would have been the best opportunity
to
put it in there.
Right.
And at the very end, you're fighting with Joe Manchin about the exact size of the unemployment benefits. And he finally, Joe's like, just don't destroy this. Come on, just give me this. That was the moment where, like, look, we're going to do a debt ceiling thing.
What about the IRA? That could have been an easy way to do it. Yeah.
Yes. Again, can you talk Manchin into it at that point? I think that might have been harder because Manchin was getting more cantankerous by that point. But certainly in the American Rescue Plan, you could just say, and if you don't want the number, you could write all debt
till 2025
until January let's say March 15th. March 14th, Ides of March are bad luck. March 14th, 2025. all debt is like you are Congress. You write the laws. You can do that. You don't have to say the new debt limit is $41 trillion or whatever number you were afraid of.
Yeah.
Chuck Schumer at the time, and this goes back to people who were much more cynical, and I think deservedly so about this, said, you know what, we'd rather do this in a bipartisan way. Now, whether he means that or not, the question is there a significant part of the Democratic Party who actually does want to see some austerity politics return?
Probably.
And they want to unwind this social democracy that we built over the course of the pandemic amid full employment. And so they want a forcing mechanism because it's austerity is unpopular, so you need a forcing mechanism to do it. So I think this is one of those moments where the cynics have the more persuasive argument.
No, I think you're right. All right, let's get to the guest, Lee Fang, standing by. Let's get to it. Joining us now, Lee Fang, friend of the show, a newly independent investigative journalist at leefang.net, I believe that, or is it .com?
.com.
I'm sorry, .com. All right, leefang.com, of which we will have a link down in the description. I am a founding member of said leefang.com, and we are very happy to support your work, Lee. You're here to talk about a very important story. Let's put it up there on the screen, which is FBI surveillance contractors probed anti-vaccine mandate activists. Lee, you've been on the forefront of exposing a lot of the hijinks that the U.S. intelligence community, the FBI, have been doing by infiltrating groups and under the name of national security and others. So what did you find in this story, and what bigger pattern is it part of?
Hey, thanks for having me. The story is part of a two-part series on the threat intelligence industry. This is a subset of the cybersecurity industry. And, when you hear the term cybersecurity, you might think authentication or passwords or what have you. But this is actually a surveillance industry. This is a type of firm that specializes in going into the parts of the internet, of social media that are private. There are a number of firms, about a dozen prominent firms that specialize in this. What they do is that they go into Reddit forums, WhatsApp groups, Signal chats, parts of the dark web. They make fake online identities to gain the trust of the admins or leaders of online organizations or organizations that have an online presence. And they get invites to these private communications. They sweep up the messages, the chats, the communications, and they monetize them. They sell them back, these communications, they sell them to the government and to corporations. They say that they're looking for quote unquote threat actors. They're largely saying that, we're looking for hackers and other kind of cyber criminals. Mm-hmm. But a big part of what they do is also look at activists. They penetrate activist groups. They research their tactics and strategies and alert their potential targets. So, this is a very interesting firm. This is one of the many threat intelligence firms of Flashpoint. And, we obtained their marketing materials and some of their other documents. Also, I interviewed them at a recent cybersecurity conference. And, they have a history of going after left-wing organizations, investigating anti-pipeline protesters, anarchists, but also these groups, these worker-led organizations that were protesting the 2021 vaccine mandate. Mm-hmm. In this particular instance, these were workers in the airline industry, pilots, stewardesses, what have you, who were not comfortable with the 2021 vaccine mandate. These were essential workers, frontline workers, many of whom were the very first people to be infected with COVID-19 and then recover. So, they made, I think, the very reasonable argument that the vaccine mandate should not apply to them because there's no exemption for people who recovered from the virus and had natural immunity. They were protesting this. And it looks like surveillance contractors like Flashpoint were investigating them. They were getting into their private Signal chats. They're looking into their private communications.
And so in order for the FBI to do some of this stuff directly, they would need warrants, they'd need some probable cause. Some of it they can get away with. Others, like getting into private Signal chats, I would think they would need some type of warrant for that. And so they end up, these kind of surveillance contractors end up creating a kind of false distinction to me between the activity of the FBI that is prohibited and the activity of these private contractors, which is allowed. So what is the FBI's role in relationship with these companies? And is there an argument to be made that they are just arms of the FBI and ought to be subject to the same laws?
Well, there's a little bit of a gray area here where we don't know exactly, where the line begins and starts with the client relationship. A lot of these firms are publicly contracted with the FBI. Flashpoint is publicly contracted with the FBI, has worked with them for many years. Many of the other firms that I profiled are, working for other intelligence agencies and the FBI, but they're also working for corporate clients here too. And, I think that's right. This, for the FBI to directly monitor the private communications of Americans, they require a warrant. It's a Fourth Amendment issue, but using a third party to gain access to these private communications represents somewhat of a backdoor, right? So like you have just like the FBI has a long history of using confidential informants, confidential human intelligence analysts and informants to monitor and spy on groups where they might not have direct access. These private contractors, these private spies, again, represent a way for the agency to gain access to materials that they don't normally have any kind of insight into. And, we're seeing a greater demand for this type of surveillance after the Discord leaks. These firms publicly advertise. Flashpoint, this one firm that monitored the anti-mandate activists, they publicly advertise that they are looking into Discord chats, that they can penetrate Discord communities. And after the Discord leaks, there's just so much demand that we get into these private communications, because again, these Discord leaks appeared on a private Discord server. And, allegedly these documents sat there for months without the government knowing. This was a huge embarrassment. So There's more of a demand for these type of firms to go in and spy on gaming communities, activist communities, any type of community where potential illegal or nefarious activity is happening.
Lee, one of the things constant I kind of see throughout your work is just the exposure of the slow creep of the surveillance state. Like it starts with the FBI and the DHS under a specific mandate. And then, you helped with Ken Klippenstein expose that new and, disinformation complex. And now, as part of your series, we're talking about anything from vegans to anti-vaccine mandate. It really just seems like they are willing to stick their tentacles into something if it goes against any basic established power center in the U.S. Or am I reading it the wrong way?
Well, look at it this way. We have a massive infrastructure in this country, government infrastructure and, government programs that fund an infrastructure that is based on surveillance. And there's this evolving mission that kind of skyrocketed since September 11th to find, potential terrorists, to find threats that are, vaguely defined by the national security state. And this is another great example of that kind of fits into this rubric. Flashpoint, this one particular firm, started out as a small consultancy from a guy named Evan Coleman, who went out and he worked with people who were infiltrating mosques and Muslim community centers. They were, dressing up and going in and recording these communities and then taking that information back and selling it to the FBI. Evan Coleman then spun out his own firm and went online and found, Al-Qaeda message boards and, ISIS online social media accounts. He would save all the information to these multi-terabyte databases and then go to U.S. law enforcement and say, look, I'm an expert. I have all these online communications. And he's monetized that content. He's been accused of helping wrongfully convict some Muslim Americans, like in the Fort Dix case. But, that was 15 years ago. Now today, as the war on terror has wound down, Flashpoint, rather than also winding down, has actually grown. It's grown exponentially. It's a huge firm. They just acquired another threat intelligence company last year. They're partnering with Google Cloud. They've got AI tools. And instead of targeting potential, Al-Qaeda suspects, they're monitoring environmental activists. They're monitoring conservatives who are concerned about the mandate. All they have is a hammer, so everything looks like nails for these surveillance contractors. They need a new enemy, a new kind of threat to target, to monetize, and it's a lot like these other kind of mission creep of the security state, that the Department of Homeland Security, rather than winding down some of its programs, now it's kind of expanding its outreach and saying, oh, we've got to target misinformation or disinformation online. We need to create these new partnerships with Twitter and Facebook to censor really ordinary First Amendment protected speech.
And in your reporting, did you find that it was a connection to the misinformation, disinformation world that allowed for the kind of anti-vaxxer surveillance? Because as you think about the other groups that were targeted, all right, anti-pipeline group, they might blow up a pipeline. I can see some potential violence there. The anti-abortion groups that you talked about being under surveillance, they've shot abortion doctors. Like, so you can step back and you can say, all right, I can intellectually see where they're going when it comes to like the potential for violence. Doesn't mean that it justifies kind of breaking Fourth Amendment laws, but I see where they're going. When it comes to the vaccine stuff, it might be harmful to themselves, maybe-ish, but who, like, I don't see are they going to blow up like the vaccine facilities or something? Or is it really, it's flowing out of the disinformation complex?
I think it's likely it's flowing out of the disinformation complex, but really it's just like a challenge to power, right? You know, you had big corporate centers endorsing these mandates, the government endorsing these mandates. You know, for these airline workers, their own unions abandoned them. You know, I talked with a lot of these workers. You know, their union wouldn't even negotiate them. They wouldn't put some of these decisions up to a vote. And so they had to these workers had to form their own organizations to protest for their rights. You know, that's their view. I think the same kind of issue applies to some of these vegan and animal rights activists. These folks, you know, some of the particular groups that I've been writing about, they don't have a history of any violence whatsoever. But, you know, I published last week an FBI memo from the Sacramento field office depicting them as a bioterror threat. You know, under the Weapons of Mass Destruction Directorate of the FBI, you know, using just really inflamed and exaggerated rhetoric to justify this kind of national security crackdown on groups, again, just kind of exercising their First Amendment rights.
Got it. Well, Lee, you're doing a fantastic job over there. LeeFang.com. As I said, I'm a subscriber. I encourage everybody else to become a subscriber. We'll have a link down there, down in the description. We want to be able to support Lee's excellent work here. And you're welcome back on the show anytime, sir. So thank you for joining us.
Thanks for your support.
Yep, you got it. Great to see you, Lee.
Absolutely. Good to see you, man. And thank you so much, Ryan, for sitting in for Crystal.
A pleasure.
Appreciate it. Bro Show's fun, as always. Crystal, like I said, will be on with Emily tomorrow. So, Ryan, you got Wednesday off. What are you going to do with yourself?
Sleep.
Yeah. Sleep and take care of your children.
Yep.
So
there you go.
That's what most people should be doing. All right. So
and obviously watch Counterpoints.
And obviously watching Counterpoints. That's my morning routine.
There you go.
After I finally get to sleep in, I put my earbuds in and I see what you guys are up to. Thank you guys so much again for supporting all of our work here. BreakingPoints.com if you are able. Otherwise, we'll see you all later.